So that seems to have been an attractive place for Neolithic farmers to settle, probably because there was either permanent or almost permanent water sources there.
Right. So, Ken, when you approached Ted with your thesis project, did he suggest that maybe you should try streams you can drive on and archaeology you can actually see? That seems better than what you do. It just seems a little easier.
You pulled the canoe up that river, Gabe. What would you say? Was it easier to pull it?
Ted's version sounds more fun to me. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
The New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast, featuring your hosts, Gabe Reinick and Ken Holyoke.
Welcome back to the Brunswick Archaeology Podcast. I'm Gabe Reinick in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and I'm joined, as I am just about every fortnight, by Ken Holyoke in Lethbridge, Alberta. How are you, Ken?
Very well, Gabe. We're in that beautiful shoulder season where the meetings have stopped and the writing can begin, and preparing for field work and all that other stuff.
Uh-huh. I thought when you meant beautiful shoulder season, you were going to tell me that you'd been working out and you were going to start wearing a tank top around Lethbridge.
Well, I have been working out more, and I've gotten out for a couple runs. I had a personal best last weekend. I ran a 10-kilometer run.
Right.
I've never done that before.
Good for you. I've never done a 10K either.
Yeah, so it was along kind of a very pretty trail right along the river down in the coulee. So
very nice. That's great.
Yeah.
What else does spring hold in Lethbridge?
Well, a couple days ago, it was like 2 centimeters of snow overnight, 2 nights in a row. But we're back to spring-like stuff, and there's buds coming out, and my son starts baseball this evening. So.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah,
that's a good game.
Yep.
I'm told that when Alberta becomes its own country, that's going to be the national pastime.
Yeah, I would assume so.
Yeah.
That's so we are careening towards that, I guess.
So how's
the other thing?
How is the freedom meter? Where are we right now on? Where are where's the sports betting on independence right now?
I think we're probably somewhere between 10 and 8 minutes before midnight.
Okay, that's well, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, no, it's not.
No, I mean you could be a triple citizen, right? At that point, right? You'd have UK, Canada, and Alberta, or will Alberta require you to renounce the other two?
I think that if as the referendum results came in, we would be packing the car to sort of begin driving. Would be the
car being an F-350. I hope.
Yeah, we'll take the Forester. It's got lots of trunk space. So.
Terrific. Well, Ken, since we're still covered under Canadian intellectual property law on this podcast, the listener may have noticed that we're still called the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast, which
we are, and not just the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast. We're going to be live in Alberta, so we will be completely out of our zone of influence.
That's pretty exciting.
It is very exciting. And so for those of you who have RSVP'd already, that's very exciting. And for those of you who haven't, you are welcome to attend even without an RSVP. Mm-hmm. We just wanted to use that as a mechanism to gauge what the interest is before we head out to Canmore.
That's right. Have you been to this bar before, Ken?
I have, yeah. Yeah, I've been there a few times, actually. Okay. It's like a bit of a institution, I think, in Canmore. It's right on the downtown main drag, and very good brewery, actually. So yeah.
Okay, so they make their own beer.
They do, yes.
Terrific. Well, that's very exciting.
It is, yeah, and it's like it's done like the bar itself is kind of very Alpine design, like so yeah.
As in like a can of Alpine. I'm not, or more like an A-frame.
like an Alpine lodge, like kind of like timbers and on the outside and everything. Very woody.
Great. That's good.
And they have a great patio in the summer too.
Oh, good, because I'm actually planning on dressing a little bit like I'm in The Sound of Music, so that's going to be great. I like to go, when I'm in the mountains.
There you go.
The hills are alive, Ken. The hills are alive.
Hills are
Sound of the
alive.
New Brunswick Archaeology podcast.
Yep.
And so, but Ken, in the meantime, we may need a new name for this podcast because of just the vast geographical expanse we're going to be covering. Because we're even going to be talking about head smashed in buffalo jump.
That's right. Yeah, head smashed in buffalo jump. We'll be talking about the country as a whole and the
Or the countries as wholes.
Countries as wholes, yeah, and archaeology in Alberta, yeah. So
country.
So Gabe, we've both worked in CRM, right?
That's right.
And we know that project demands are always growing.
Mm-hmm.
There's pressure to both speed up and improve the quality of work, increase crew pay, and somehow make a profit, and always find that balance between the needs of clients, regulators, and stakeholders by finding efficiencies.
Sorry,
right?
Ken, just to interrupt, you're reading the new mission statement of the University of Lethbridge, aren't you?
Well, if I ever get the promotional material that I'm hoping for, yes.
Okay.
So, Gabe, do you know what the White House Correspondents' Dinner and a hungover field tech have in common? That's right. They can both produce situations of improperly placed flags. Now, we at the New Brunswick Archaeology podcast believe in the compliance process and know that when you're in the high potential zone and you want to get all of the potential out of your workers, and that's going to be made easier by our new partnership with Nisimono Corporation. That's right. For the lucky listener that renames this New Brunswick Archaeology podcast, they will be the first to demo Nisimono's Gitso Kikai, the Autoflagger 3000. No longer will you need to worry about swinging your bush axe through the long tape or into your shin, laying in transects of increasingly acute angles thanks to our friend of the show, Trevor Charlemagne Dow's literal magnetism, or even trying to figure out an RTK stakeout program on those hot spring mornings after Derby Day. That's right, the Autoflagger 3000 is a custom-made all-terrain vehicle, GNSS surveying tool, and small-scale timber harvester, all built into one.
Wow.
It features a reinforced steel chassis with adjustable height depending on the depths of hummocks, and comes standard with a shuttle-grade composite carbon body for the toughest environments. The wheels are reminiscent of those on the Mars rover, truly all-terrain, and feature aluminum rims and wheels with titanium spokes, featuring protruding treads called grousers for traction, and presumably for squishing those birds that emerge from the forest floor and spook the green hands.
Wow.
On one side of this beast is a retractable 8 or 12-inch circulating saw that brings 88,000 RPMs of fury to that damn tree that's always in the way of your line.
Mm-hmm.
Featuring a 1,200-pin flag hopper, the Autoflagger 3000 can be programmed to hammer out those babies in 5, 10, or 20-meter intervals in blue, green, orange, or pink, or customize it to drop a pattern sequence and bring a splash of rainbow to that field site. And today, exclusively for our listeners, and because we value their IP, their wit, and their wile, we're getting Nisimono to throw in their new AI programmable crew chief that will assess your testing area and drop those flags in at judgmental spacing based on its customizable predictive model.
Okay.
Now, because we work in remote environments, the Autoflagger 3000 is equipped with a long-life battery and an attachable solar array for efficient charging and a zero carbon footprint. Yes, you'll be saving time, money, and be able to keep your shovels sharp and your crews sharper as they march into the testing area. That's right. You could say with the Autoflagger 3000, you'll be able to move away from an obvious mitigation quagmire with this almost perfectly staged potential area and turn what could have been a bad day into a ballroom of shovel testing beauty if you, listener, renamed the New Brunswick Archaeology podcast.
Well, Ken, that's very exciting. And I would just like to say here that friend of the program, Christian, is not allowed to win this one. That just seems like an accident waiting to happen. But anyone else, Ken, where would they write in with the new name for this podcast?
They would send that into newbrunswickarchaeology@gmail.com. That's New Brunswick Archaeology, all one word, archaeology spelled ARCHAEOLOGY, New Brunswick Archaeology@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram at new_Brunswick_archaeology, archaeology spelled the same way, and find us on LinkedIn. Just type into the search bar, New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast.
And if you reach into that mailbag, Ken, what do you find?
What do we have in the mailbag today?
Or is it hard to tell? That'll be funny for the listener in a minute.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
That's foreshadowing.
So Tamim has a message for subscriber. We don't have any emails, but I did notice, and I don't know how to get back there. We have some comments on YouTube.
Okay. And while you're doing this, Ken, I just want to remind the listener that if they send us a screenshot of having donated, I believe $20 or more, $25 or more to a CAA scholarship fund, we will furnish them while supplies last with a New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast apron.
That's right.
We have 17 left.
We have 17 left. That's exciting. Okay, so
Where
these are.
Well, Ken,
So-
given that it's a busy day of podcasting for us, we could do it on the next episode.
We could, yes. The listener can listen to me stumble through trying to find YouTube comments, but all that to say, there are YouTube comments, and stay tuned, listener, for the next fortnight when I read those YouTube comments.
That's right, listener. You get to enjoy those in about a fortnight. And so, Ken, we've got a very exciting program lined up for the listener. We're talking to Ted Banning about the Neolithic.
Yeah, professor at University of Toronto, and a man who also has some experience in New Brunswick archaeology.
Yes, and who is I will stumble over the word, coin collector.
Numismatist.
Is that right?
Numismatist. Yes, I think that's the right pronunciation. It is a tricky word, though, isn't it?
Yeah. I feel like
So-
if you do it while holding a wand, you can blow something up.
Exactly. Yes.
Yes.
Whoever coined that phrase was trying to do a tongue twister.
Well, Ken, should we take this intro to the bank and hand it over to Ted Banning?
Cash in on this one, listener.
Talk to you soon, listener.
Welcome back to the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast, and today we are joined by Dr. Edward Ted Banning, who is an archaeologist and a professor at University of Toronto. He did his degrees at University of Toronto, followed by a postdoc at the Universities of Virginia and Arizona, and eventually found himself back at U of T, where he has taught since 1988. Dr. Banning's work has taken him throughout the Levant on projects dating back to the 1970s, conducting surveys in southern Jordan before beginning a long-term project at Wadi Ziklab in northern Jordan throughout the 1980s. Dr. Banning specializes in landscape archaeology and studying the ways that the spatial organization of the built environment, in conjunction with the spatial distributions of other aspects of material culture, can inform us about changes in prehistoric and early historic social systems. He has a special interest in archaeological field survey, including theoretical aspects of survey detection, functions, search optimization and evaluation of survey results, as well as numismatics, and has published no fewer than 5 books, and according to ResearchGate, lists 237 publications of record, including many intersecting with the emergence of agriculture, pastoralism, inequality, and village life in the Levant, which is what he joins us here for today, continuing our season-long discussion about complexity. And for those of you that don't know, Ted has also been involved in New Brunswick archaeology on 2 separate committees, supervising and reviewing work about the Lower Wollastug, both myself and my master supervisor, Susan Blair. And so, Ted, welcome to the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast. And before we get going, I have to say you're also the first person that we've interviewed that has a Wikipedia page. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, well, thank you for that intro, Ken. And nice to meet you, Gabe.
Nice to meet you, Ted. I appreciate you coming on. Maybe to start off, we're gonna do that thing podcasts do when they say for the listener, but really what it also means is to catch Ken and I up so that our questions will seem hopefully a little bit more informed. But can we do a little bit of geography and timing? What is the Levant, and where is it, and how does this all relate to the Fertile Crescent? And then what is the timing of the pre-pottery Neolithic and the Neolithic, and why do we add letters to the pre-pottery Neolithic A, B, and C?
Okay. That's a lot, but I'll try to get through that. First of all, the Levant is kind of corresponds to the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea, extending inland for 200-300 kilometers maybe. So it includes parts of what is now southern Turkey, western Syria, all of Lebanon, all of Israel and the West Bank, and at least the western half of Jordan, maybe a bit more, and arguably also a little bit of the northwestern part of Saudi Arabia. So it's just kind of a traditional name that's been around for a few hundred years. And it's kind of a handy term for us archaeologists who are interested in that part of the world. So you don't have to list off all those countries, for one thing. And as far as how it relates to the Fertile Crescent, one way to think of it is it's kind of the western arm of the Fertile Crescent. If you view the Fertile Crescent as being kind of an arc, then the eastern part of the arc is Mesopotamia and the mountains of western Iran, and the northern part goes into Turkey, and then the western arm is the Levant. As far as the time categories go, and you have to keep in mind these time categories are artificial constructs by archaeologists. They're kind of a useful shorthand, but you don't want to take the dates too seriously. We have an approximate idea of what they date to, but depending on where exactly you are, the dates are going to vary. A lot of these events that we're talking about happened a bit earlier in the northern part of the Levant than they did in the southern part of the Levant, for example. But in rough terms, the Neolithic follows on what we call the Epi-Paleolithic, which is really just the last gasp of the Paleolithic, and that ends around 10,000 BCE. And when you get a transition into the pre-pottery Neolithic A, or PPNA, around 10,000 BCE, and that continues until around, in ballpark figures, 8,800 BCE, when it transitions into the pre-pottery Neolithic B, which itself has at least 3 subdivisions: early, middle, and late. And that continues, PPNB continues till probably around 6,800 BCE, when depending on what kind of terminology you use, it either transitions into the PPNC, or the pre-pottery Neolithic C, or some other people prefer to call it the final PPNB. And that continues until 65 or 6,400 BCE. And then you go into the pottery Neolithic, or the late Neolithic. And again, pottery Neolithic starts earlier in the northern Levant than it does in the south. But yeah, ballpark figures say 6,500 BCE. And that continues until around 5,000 BCE. But again, it has subdivisions. So the early part of the pottery Neolithic in the southern Levant is associated with something we call the Yarmouktian culture. And I've done some work on that. And then the last part of it is associated, or at least a lot of the sites are associated with what's called the Wadi Raba culture, which in the Wadi Raba culture is kind of a transition to the Chalcolithic, which follows the Neolithic in that part of the world. So that transition is around 5,000 BCE in round terms. So I think that is what you were asking. So it gives you kind of the broad context in which all of this stuff happens. And I guess I should say, well, maybe I shouldn't say yet, because I think we're going to come to some of these things as we go along.
Right. I love the final PPNB. That's a great phrase for period.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot to mention where those terms came from, because you asked me why do we have these A, Bs, and Cs. It has to do with it. Really, that terminology goes back to a very famous archaeologist. She was the excavator of the site of Jericho in what nowadays is the West Bank. Her name is Dame Kathleen Kenyon, a British archaeologist. And she, when she was excavating at Jericho, she got down really deep and she found some very important Neolithic deposits. And the upper part of the Neolithic she called pre-pottery. The upper part of the Neolithic that didn't have pottery in it, she called pre-pottery Neolithic B, and the lower part she called pre-pottery Neolithic A. And the most famous feature of the PPNA at Jericho that she discovered was a very large stone tower, like a huge stone tower. Even today, it's 8 meters high, and it probably originally would have been taller than that. And it's about, I think, something like, I forget, at least 10 meters in diameter. I can't remember exactly the diameter now. So it's a huge stone structure with a stairway inside it that is almost 10,000 years old.
Oh, wow.
Well, actually, no, what am I saying? It's almost 12,000 years old.
Yeah. So is the division between the Epi-Paleolithic and the the pre-pottery Neolithic, is that like a Pleistocene Holocene transition? Is that why the
It
dividing
kind of
line is
is.
there? Or are there
Again,
logical-
these names are kind of artificial constructs, and I always like to say that prehistoric people didn't wake up one morning and say, "Hey, next Tuesday we're not going to be Epipaleolithic anymore. We're going to be Neolithic people." And we're going to throw away all our tools that we've been using all our lives, and we're going to start using new tools. So presumably all these things were really gradual transitions, where new kinds of tools being introduced and becoming more popular, and eventually old kinds of tools being phased out. And the archaeological definitions of these phases or cultures are mostly based on stone tools, and then later on pottery.
Yeah.
And that's a very artificial way of looking at it. When you think about in terms of people's life ways, that the transitions would have been a lot more gradual. And I'm sure the people who had that lived experience wouldn't even have noticed that anything was happening.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have, PPNA people would have thought of themselves as the same people as were living there in the last part of the Epipaleolithic, which in the southern Levant is known as the Natufian culture.
Okay.
Named after the first site that was discovered belonging to that culture, that was in a valley called Wadi Natuf.
Okay. And so again, for the listener, do tell, what is a tell and what is a wadi, and why are they where archaeologists have focused a lot of their work in the Levant?
Okay, since I just mentioned Wadi Natuf, I'll deal with that wadi first. Wadi more or less just means valley, but in the Near Eastern context or the Middle Eastern context, more specifically, what those typically are, a wadi is typically a valley in which much of the stream, so it is a valley that would have a river or a stream in it, and that stream flows quite profusely in the winter and the spring, but in the summer, most of it's dried up. So the upper parts of the wadi, the stream is gone. You just have basically, it's like gravel stream bed that frankly we archaeologists use as roads. When we're doing survey and stuff, we drive on those because it's basically like a road. But if you went there in the wintertime, it would be like 1 meter or 2 meters deep in rushing water, looking like the Colorado River or something like that. It's quite a substantial stream. The lower parts of those wadis quite often have permanent water in them because they're fed by springs.
Okay.
But the smaller ones, if they don't have springs, they might be completely dry in the summertime. But most of the wadis that I'm familiar with have water in them all year round, but only in the lower part of the wadi, which in my case is close to the Jordan Valley. So I've tended most of my career to focus on valleys that drain into the Jordan Valley. Okay. It's the deepest feature in the region. It's actually the bottom of the Jordan Valley is well below sea level. It's something like 230 meters below sea level. So all the waterways basically drain into that, and eventually that water ends up in the Dead Sea. So those wadis tend to have permanent water at their western ends if you're in Jordan, where I've been working, or in their eastern ends if you're working from the Israeli Palestinian side. Interesting. And then as to tells, tell is just it's actually in both Hebrew and Arabic, tell just means hill. But when archaeologists use the term tell, we're specifically talking about a particular kind of hill that is built up from cultural deposits. So it results from repeated occupation over thousands of years, and especially from demolition of architecture. So when people build a house in that part of the world, it's going to be usually building it either of stone or of mud brick or some combination of the two. And then when the house gets old, they knock it down and build another house on the same spot. So all the demolition debris eventually builds up. Some cases, these tells are like 40 meters high. They get to be quite substantial hills. Other things contributed to it as well, including trash deposits and all that kind of stuff. But it's mostly architectural debris that makes it really, really high. So that's what a tell is. And the reason archaeologists focus on, or at least used to focus almost exclusively on tells, is A, they're very easy to find. They're obvious because they're really obvious points in the landscape. because they don't even just look like a hill. They look like a very particular kind of hill. They have kind of a particular shape, it's kind of conical sides and then flat on the top, almost like a little volcano or something like that. And that has to do with the nature of how they were built up over time. Many of them had fortification walls around them in the past, during the Bronze or Iron Ages, which also contributed to them having very steep sides on them, because when those walls kind of collapse and whatnot, it just, makes a slope, but it's a pretty steep slope. So if you want to be sure to find some really, exciting stuff, especially for the Bronze and Iron Ages, a tell is a really obvious place to excavate. Right. For somebody like me, if I want to dig Neolithic stuff and I go to a tell, I'm probably going to have to dig down at least 20 meters to get to the Neolithic levels. So I've personally shied away from tells. I don't really want to excavate on a tell.
I think is
so I tend to focus on other areas where Neolithic sites also occur, and they build up, or it's very small tells. So actually, one site where I excavated was technically a tell, but it's only about 9 meters high instead of being like 20 or 30 or 40 meters high. And we had to dig pretty deep there, but at least it wasn't as bad. We had to dig down about 4 meters to get to the Neolithic stuff. But most of the sites I've excavate, you only have to dig, half a meter or something to reach the Neolithic levels, and I find that much more satisfactory. And those sites, by the way, going back to a wadi, those sites tend to be on stream terraces within wadis. Okay. So that seems to have been an attractive place for Neolithic farmers to settle, probably because there was either permanent or almost permanent water sources there.
Right.
So, Ken, when you approached Ted with your thesis project, did he suggest that maybe you should try streams you can drive on and archaeology you can actually see? That seems better than what you do. It just seems a little easier.
You pulled the canoe up that river, Gabe. What would you say? Was it easier to pull it?
Ted's version sounds more fun to me. That's all I'm saying. Yeah. So, Ted, part of the reason we're having you on here is that our this season's theme is complexity. And you've done a lot of work on the emergence of social complexity in the Levant. And we talked earlier in the season to Gary Copeland, with whom you did that People Who Live in Big Houses volume. And so we'd be curious just what kind of changes you see in things like lithics, agropastoralism, rank, competition, these sort of areas you've studied, and how you relate that to complexity, how you think about complexity, and how it's appeared in your work.
Okay. I'm probably not going to say too much about lithics because, lithics, or at least certain kinds of tool types, change over the course of the Neolithic, and archaeologists use those kind of as chronological markers for the most part. And some of them are really quite beautiful and stuff. So, for example, the pre-PIER Neolithic B has a variety of kinds of projectile points that are really beautifully made and, very fun to find. When you find those while you're excavating, it's quite nice to find a projectile point that's this big and beautifully napped and everything. And you find those and you know for sure you're in a PPNB site. But we don't actually know very much about what those are telling us about things like social complexity. There's usually other kinds of things that are more informative about that. As far as agropastoralism goes, there are lots of changes in that. So, there's in the earlier Neolithic and the PPNA, people are still mostly hunting and gathering, probably, and their agropastoral activities, if you want to call them that, would likely have involved kind of low-level cultivation of wild plants and some kind of management of wild animals. So they might have captured some wild goats and put them in a corral, but when you get your zooarchaeologist to analyze the bones, there's no morphological changes. They look like wild animals still, even though they might have been tamed, some of them. But we don't have much evidence of that. So the zooarchaeology tells us that they were wild animals. But there probably was some amount of management and that sort of thing. And one of the things that kind of gets in my craw, I'm sure many of your listeners, even though they're focused on New Brunswick archaeology, have heard of the site of Göbekli Tepe. And in the popular media, it's always described as a hunter-gatherer site. And that's very misleading in my view, because all Neolithic sites of that period are technically hunter-gatherer sites, even though most of them were probably engaged in some kind of low-level agropastoralism, but with wild plants and animals. By the time you get into pre-pottery Neolithic B, you get increasing investment in agropastoral activity, so that some of those plants become domesticated over time. So, wheat and barley are the ones that people tend to focus on a lot, but there were also lentils and peas and things like that, that kind of gradually the morphologically domesticated varieties became dominant in the assemblages over time, even though the wild ones didn't disappear altogether. And by the PPNB, you at least have domesticated sheep and goats. By the end of PPNB, domesticated cattle, I think. But some animals, like pigs, didn't get domesticated until the late Neolithic. Chickpeas also didn't get domesticated until the late Neolithic. So it's an ongoing process. It's not like one day they're hunter-gatherers and the next day they're farmers.
Yeah.
It was kind of a gradual increase in the importance of agropastoralism over time, and hunting and gathering never went away altogether. People were still doing some hunting and gathering even in the late Neolithic, and for that matter, even in the Bronze Age or whatever, Chalcolithic and Bronze Age, I'm sure they did at least some, but their subsistence by that time would have been based almost entirely on agropastoralism. And by the time you get to the Iron Age, hunting is a sport, essentially, right? People would engage in hunting for prestige and that sort of thing, but not so much as because they needed it for food, although I'm sure they did some hunting for food as well. So where am I going with this? In terms of social changes over the course of the Neolithic, it's very hard to be very sure about that. In fact, one of the things that has always struck me is how little we really know about social stuff about the Neolithic, even after all these years of doing research on it. Many archaeologists like to describe the earlier Neolithic as an egalitarian society, but I think in my opinion, there's a lot of misconception of what that even means, because a lot of people think it means everybody's equal and there was no hierarchy and all this kind of stuff, which personally I think is kind of nonsensical, because even when social anthropologists study egalitarian societies, all that means is that there were no differences in rank that were ascribed at birth. If you wanted to be a chief, you had to achieve the status of chief through your ability, your persuasion, your charisma, and that kind of stuff. But I'm sure there were lots of different statuses in even the early Neolithic. Like, we have some evidence that there might have been shamans or even witches. There presumably must have been some kind of leadership structure, but it, quite likely was a fairly merit-based leadership structure.
Yeah. So a little.
And in most egalitarian societies, if you don't like what the leader's doing, you just leave and go somewhere else, right? So some families probably just would move away somewhere if they didn't like what was going on. By the Chalcolithic, which immediately follows the Neolithic, we have some indications that there might have been more, more hierarchical structures, in that some of the artifacts we find look like they are symbols of rank. Okay. For example, we find both stone and copper mace heads. So, think about it. Even today, one of the symbols of a king or a queen is they have a mace. But, originally a mace is a weapon used to bash somebody over the head. But it seems that it was likely, even early on, also a symbol of status. And we find those stone ones quite a lot. So probably even at a local level, the local mayor or whatever you want to call them, probably walked around carrying one of these maces. But in some cases of really elevated status, we know there were copper maces in the Chalcolithic. Copper would have been a very rare material, very expensive, if you will. And there was a very famous hoard of copper objects that included, I forget how many, but something like 80 or 90 copper maces in that hoard, as well as a couple of copper crowns even, or at least what looked like crowns. So it seems that by the Chalcolithic, you probably had a much more rigid hierarchy going on. And what we don't really know very much about is how we got to that from the Neolithic, because we don't see a lot of evidence for very structured hierarchy in the Neolithic. Doesn't mean there was none, because it could be that some of the material culture that might have signaled that might have been imperishable materials, for example, that we don't find. But we don't see a lot of variation in things. Well, in fact, we don't find anything that you can really think of as wealth, let alone variations in wealth or status items. We don't usually get grave goods in the Neolithic. So it's very hard to see
in stuff like
what's really going on in terms of social changes over the course of the Neolithic. I'm sure there were lots of changes, but they're very hard to identify with the kind of evidence we tend to get.
Do you see differentiation in things like house floor size, or like the stuff that might indicate one of these aggrandizers or these sort of charismatic individuals maybe accumulated a little bit more than others? Yeah,
that's a good question, and probably that question partly originates in that book that Gary and I edited. You're probably thinking about that because we talked a lot about bigger than average houses in that book, and you do find a certain amount of that. So in the Neolithic, most houses are approximately equal size, and you don't often find ones that are bigger or nicer or more elaborate than others. But that's not universally true. It's true, I think, of most sites. But there is some variation. So, for example, one very famous Neolithic site is Çatalhöyük in Turkey, where many of the houses are very elaborate inside. They have wall paintings and cattle horns sticking out of the walls and this kind of stuff. And many years ago, when those were first discovered, it was thought that the fancy ones were shrines and the kind of crappy ones were just ordinary houses. We now know there's a continuum and there's no sharp division, and that most likely they're all houses. In fact, almost certainly they are all houses. We have plenty of evidence for food production in them and that kind of stuff. Although Ian Hodder, who has directed 25 years of excavation at Çatalhöyük, he likes to call the fancier ones history houses, because he with the implication that they might have been the houses of, let's say, the head of a lineage or something like that, and they maybe conducted more than the average amount of rituals in those houses or something like that. So there's certainly some variation in houses at a site like that, although they don't vary much in size, but they do vary in elaboration. And there are, in the later Neolithic, you're more likely than in the early Neolithic to find variations in house size and elaboration. One of the sub-phases of the late Neolithic in northern Mesopotamia and the northern Levant is called the Halaf culture. And there you do sometimes find some buildings that look like they're probably houses, but they're bigger than the other ones, and sometimes have fancier stuff in them, like really nice pottery and things like obsidian mirrors and that kind of stuff that might indicate some high status. But most Neolithic sites, you don't get a great deal of variation. In the pre-pottery Neolithic B, you get almost no variation. You do get the occasional house that's bigger than the others, but otherwise looks exactly the same. And one reason that those don't get as much attention as evidence for variation in household status is that when archaeologists find those bigger ones, they sometimes decide that it's a temple.
Okay.
This is one of the things that I've criticized a lot myself, is that
it's ceremonial.
Yeah, they just say the bigger one must be a temple. It's like, come on, guys. This is like what archaeologists are constantly accused of, thinking that everything that they can't understand must be religious or something, And when you really look at them, they look no different than any other houses, except they're a little bit bigger, or in some cases quite a bit bigger. But but I personally don't think they're temples. I think they're just houses.
And
There are
are
a
they
few
looking
weird
at-
buildings in the pre-Pioneer Neolithic B that might be something unusual, but what exactly they are, who knows? Maybe it's religious, maybe some economic function or something. For example, at the site of Ain Ghazal, a very famous pre-Pioneer Neolithic B site in Jordan, the excavations found two circular structures when all the other houses, all the houses that we find are rectangular. But there are two circular structures there that have very weird floor features and stuff, like channels under the floor and whatnot. And the director of that project, Gary Rawlson, thinks that those are some kind of shrines or something, and maybe they are. But I think it's possible that it had some kind of industrial purpose too, like a malting building or something, like a place for malting barley or something, because it has these plaster floors that are raised up and have channels underneath leading to what looks like kind of like a hearth. So I could picture them heating up the floor or something to help malt the barley or something. Anyway, who knows? We don't really know what they are, but so there are a few weird things, but in general in the Neolithic, the houses all look pretty much the same.
And are they like nuclear family houses? Like, do we have any sense of like how people were living? Like, does it change through time? And are these are obviously probably like village life, so it's not just sort of an isolated house or two. There's probably dozens of houses
well, that varies as well. But in the early Neolithic, it is definitely village life. You get sites range from anywhere, these are just estimates, but from having 20 to several hundred houses, and the houses are all fairly small, like on the order of 25 to 30 square meters in size in the PPNB, and even smaller in the PPNA. The PPNA ones are round, circular, or oval. The PPNB ones start out circular, but very quickly become rectangular and stay that way. They don't have very many. They usually have one main room and then a couple of storage rooms, and probably a kind of porch on the front. And they're, judging by their size, it looks like they're something like nuclear family units. Once you get in the pottery Neolithic, you get kind of a divergence. Small sites like the ones that I focus on usually have small, fairly crappy looking 1 or 2 room houses. But bigger villages, there's a very famous pottery Neolithic village in northern Israel called Shar HaGolan. It has large kind of courtyard groups. So each house is actually only a 2-room house, has a main living room and a storage room, but they're arranged around courtyards. And the director of that project, Yossi Garfinkel, thinks that these courtyard groups are probably extended families. And he's probably right. But most likely they're at least some kind of corporate group that's bigger than a nuclear family. And it's kind of plausible that each 2-room house belongs to a nuclear family, or in some cases, maybe just one person. But all the houses around a courtyard probably belong to a corporate group that was probably based on kinship. So it's most likely either a matrilineal or a patrilineal clan or something like that.
So, Ted, you've used the phrase a continuum a couple of times, which I think for the listener who's really hoping this was going to be a great cram session for their finals, is that they're going to be disappointed that this wasn't a lot simpler. But one of the terms we've used here is the Neolithic Revolution, and that I think is a term that even in North America we I think frame our models in terms of that. Is the Neolithic Revolution still a kind of valid concept, or do we need to rethink that model?
Neolithic Revolution was a term that I think was coined by V. Gordon Childe, and I think it's an appropriate term if you think of it as meaning a major change in the way humans, get on in the world and interact with their environment and that sort of thing. Because there's no question that after agropastoralism became entrenched and became the main economy of these people, that their lives were kind of changed forever. They could go back to being hunter-gatherers, but it wouldn't be especially easy for them to go back to being pure hunter-gatherers. But if you want to have that mean kind of like the the Russian Revolution or American Revolution or something like that, that was something that happened really rapidly, then I think it doesn't work, because it clearly was not rapid. The more we know about it, the more we understand that the full adoption of agriculture and eventually pastoralism in the Near East took at least a couple thousand years to happen. So it happened over the entirety of the Neolithic. Sometimes change was rapid, sometimes it was slower. The initial adoption of wheat, barley, lentils, peas, sheep, and goats might have been only over a couple of hundred years or something like that. But then for them to adopt more crops and more animals took thousands of years, really. And initially, as I mentioned before, growing and harvesting crops was probably only a relatively small percentage of their economy. So they were still relying quite a lot on hunting and gathering. And over time, the importance of the agro economy became more and more. But that probably would have taken at least several centuries. I think really the entirety of PPNA, agro-pastoralism, would have been very minor component, I think. And PPNB, transition from PPNA to PPNB, it might have been a little bit steeper curve, that the adoption of those things kind of took off for a bit, and then it kind of leveled off for a while. And they were very slow to adopt new domesticated animals. By the way, I should mention that I'm excluding dogs here. Dogs had already been domesticated, well before the Neolithic. But in terms of food animals, they were very slow to adopt new animals and to domesticate new animals. So initially they had sheep and goats, gradually adopted cattle, pigs quite late. Fowl was even later. I don't know when they do it. Actually, I don't even know when they domesticated fowl, but would have been probably considerably later.
That's interesting. I feel like there's maybe some lessons in there about how we think about complexity and the emergence of some of this stuff as being at different tempos and using different parts of the package that we think of all that going together.
Yeah, certainly when I was a young student, we actually talked about the Neolithic package.
Yeah.
That was actually a term we used, Neolithic package. And the assumption behind that was that all these things were bundled together and they all kind of exploded out of the Near East and across Europe and stuff as a unit. They all went together. I think it now looks more like, people in individual villages made their own decisions about which things to adopt and which things not to adopt. Cyprus, for example, is an odd case, because they quite early on adopted some aspects of the Neolithic, including wheat and barley agriculture, but they completely ignored other aspects of the Neolithic package for quite a long time.
Huh.
Interesting. Yeah. And we always think too about like these ideas about like kind of the chicken and egg argument around like, did, engaging with agropastoralism mean that people suddenly became complex, or were they becoming complex? And therefore, and so like the intersection of sort of the pacing of adoption of domesticates and village life and monumental architecture, for example, you talked about this 8-meter column. All of that stuff is happening at different paces and tempos depending upon where you are in this region. It's not really entirely clear where it kind of emerges first, or what emerges first, or what's sort of the cause and effect of this, because it's just we don't have that resolution.
No, we don't. And, one of my pet peeves is that archaeologists are constantly wanting to claim that they found the first or the earliest of something, and that's partly, it helps with funding and publicity and all that kind of thing, get you on YouTube or whatever. But I've always thought it's kind of nonsensical, because if there actually was a first of whatever it is, like the first person who domesticated a goat or something like that, the odds that we would just happen to excavate the correct site to find that are pretty low when you consider how many thousands of sites are out there. We've only, sampled a very tiny amount of what's out there. So I think it's kind of a fool's errand, but that's what people like to do. They like to claim. You see it all the time in the kind of popular science news. Somebody found the first of this and the earliest of that. Yeah. But I think things are more complicated than that.
Well, here at the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast, we'll get you on YouTube even without the first. Don't worry.
Yeah, exactly. You view archaeological patterns at a landscape scale. And so something that again, has led you to be involved in a couple of New Brunswick-based PhD projects. How does this theoretical grounding inform the kinds of patterns that you see during these really kind of broad scale and significant periods of cultural change? Like, how does the landscape scale kind of inform that?
Yeah, well, maybe it has something to do with being of a certain age or something. But certainly, when I was a student, I studied archaeology in the days when processual archaeology ruled. So that probably influenced me quite a bit. So I've always been interested in landscape archaeology, but I wouldn't describe myself as a processualist, especially these days. But I have certainly been investing a lot of my theoretical energies or methodological energies in sort of the empiricism of this kind of stuff. So on the one hand, I'm sympathetic to all kinds of theoretical approaches to landscapes, which these days, extend to, phenomenology and all kinds of stuff like that. But at the same time, I see some of that research as perhaps being a bit naive in that they act as though they know what the ancient landscape was like, especially things like phenomenology. If you wander around Wadis Zaklab, where I spent a lot of my life today, and act as though you're experiencing the landscape the way some Neolithic person would have experienced it, you're just deluding yourself, because the modern landscape doesn't look even remotely like the ancient one did. So I think it's important to do things like, geoarchaeology and paleoethnobotany to try to figure out what the ancient landscape was like. And furthermore, if you're interested in settlement patterns, I've invested a lot of my time in theory and methods having to do with archaeological survey so that we can build an empirical database of where the sites and settlements and other, settlement sites as well as other kinds of sites were and how they interrelated with each other, instead of just assuming that the ones we know about are all that there are. Like, there are so many biases in our record of where sites are, and I've spent a fair bit of my career trying to find ways to correct those biases. Because one of the points I've made, again, focusing on the Neolithic, is that almost all the Neolithic sites we know about were found by accident. Mm-hmm. They were not found by archaeological surveys. They were found mostly by road construction and things like that. So it seems you want to find Neolithic sites, your best thing to do is build a road. And then you're probably going to find some Neolithic sites. But instead, what I've done is I've done archaeological surveys that kind of focus on the kinds of areas where roads tend to get built, if you will. So, again, the kinds of Neolithic sites I'm interested in occur in these wadis along the lower slopes of the valleys. And that tends to be where they build roads because it's a least cost path, essentially, if you want to think in GIS terms. And if you do things like subsurface soundings and inspecting erosion gullies and road cuts and other kinds of exposures, you can quite often find these sites that would not actually be found by traditional foot survey. Because if you just walk around inspecting, fields, lentil fields or something like that, even if there is a Neolithic site there, its odds are that it's buried under a meter of deposit and you're not going to see it.
Yeah, I don't remember in your survey book the chapter on building roads. I'll have to return to that. Look at that. But speaking of books, you're the author of a number of books, and I think probably many of the listeners, especially the students, are going to be familiar with the Archaeologist Laboratory, which I think is the sort of standard lab text. It's a great book. But you have a new book out, Archaeological Reasoning, A Guide to Understanding the Past. Could you tell us a bit about this book and what you're trying to do with it?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the plug.
Yeah. It'll be on the screen here right now, Ted. So just look up at it.
Yeah, the reason I wrote that book is that after many years of doing undergraduate teaching at University of Toronto, my experience was that most of our students would take a first-year, very introductory archaeology course that tended to be a combination of world prehistory and a little bit of method and theory mixed in, but at a very low level. And then they go into third and fourth year courses, not really being prepared for them. And they quite often would struggle. They didn't really know what they should be doing. They didn't understand the terminology. And their theoretical and methodological knowledge was, kind of unsophisticated. So it was a very steep learning curve for them when they are thrown into these courses at the upper level where they had to, understand concepts that they really weren't prepared for. So I suggested that we should start a new second year course that bridged the gap between the first year introductory courses and the upper level courses. And so I started such a course and I started teaching it, and I was looking around for textbooks for it. And, the first year I offered it, I did pick a textbook, but it really wasn't appropriate. And I found it was really hard to impossible to find a textbook that really fit what I wanted to do for this course. They're usually either too introductory or too advanced, mostly too introductory. And I also wanted to make it very broad in scope, in that even the ones textbooks that were not too bad, they, a lot of them tend to focus too much on the United States archaeology and that sort of thing. They're really not very broad in scope, and they almost never were the kind of thing that would appeal to people interested in classical archaeology or Chinese archaeology or historical archaeology, that sort of thing. So I was or Near Eastern archaeology. So I was trying to make it much broader in scope as well. So I ended up writing this book as a text for that course, and using my students kind of as guinea pigs with draft chapters and stuff like that. My goal was to cover not all, but about a dozen of the kind of major research areas, I guess, in archaeology, like settlement pattern studies and economy and lithics and foodways, that kind of stuff. And to cover some of the substance of it, some of the method and theory involved in it at an intermediary level, and to use examples from not only around the world, but from different research traditions, I guess you'd say. So, the way classical archaeologists do archaeology is a little bit different from the way somebody doing Southwestern American archaeology would do archaeology, or somebody in New Brunswick archaeology would do it. So I tried to make sure I reflect, that the book reflected these different traditions as well. So I have each chapter also has an exercise or two, and the exercises, one of them has to do with analysis of finds from a shipwreck in the Mediterranean. I also have one that has to do with a mound in England. I have an Iroquoian village. I have a survey in Peru. I have mortuary archaeology in China, and so on, as these exercises. So I was really trying to, make it broad in its appeal to students, while giving them the grounding in some of the things that they would need to know to succeed in upper level courses, without making it too difficult. So for one of the kind of catchphrases I tended to use in that course was I wanted them to learn how to think statistically without actually doing statistics. Because that's one of the areas, like when I teach the lab course that my lab textbook is used for, the students have to do some pretty hard, pretty tough statistics in that course. Not the highest level of, I don't expect them to do multivariate analysis or whatever, but I do expect them to know how to do a systematic, stratified cluster sample of a site or whatever, which, introductory textbooks don't teach you how to do that. And even a lot of statistics courses don't teach you how to do that. So before you throw people into having to do that kind of thing, I want them to understand a little bit about statistics without actually having to do statistics. So they, I have them doing a lot of graphs, for example, so they get to learn things about distributions and how you can recognize non-randomness in graphs and in data by using graphs. So some of the assignments involve doing lots of different kinds of graphs. So there's bar graphs, cumulative frequency diagrams, and that kind of thing. Which also improves their graphing skills, because that's another thing, is I find most archaeologists are really terrible at doing graphs. So I wanted my students to know how to do graphs better.
And you remind them not to do pie charts. I remember that from your...
Oh, yeah. I don't like pie charts. I think pie charts are effective in a very restricted set of circumstances. But as a general rule, a bar chart is way better than a pie chart.
You look nervous when Ted talks about math. Did he once catch a statistical error at a rather late hour in somebody's dissertation?
Yeah, the sweat on my brow, in that boardroom at U of T, and actually, it's like what you're talking about, sort of the bridging the gap between theory and method, and this jump from introductory courses to upper level ones. Gabe and I were just having a conversation this morning with a colleague of ours about some of the challenges that we're finding with some of our upper year classes. Is that the students seem to have this gap in their knowledge, jumping from these intro courses up to the third year ones, where I was saying I'm carving out part of a North American archaeology course to sort of talk about basic like hunter gatherer theory, when some of that stuff should be we can shunt to other levels and kind of bring the students along in a better way. So this definitely fills an important space there.
Yeah, I hope so. But just for example, just one kind of silly example. Obviously, I'm not going to ask second year students to do GIS modeling or something like that. It's not that kind of course, and it's also I would wait for them to take a GIS course in the geography department or something before I assign anything like that. But what I do expect they should know is what is a least cost path, and why is a least cost path important, and how in general terms is that done. I don't expect you to write code for it or anything like that, but you should know what it is and why we care about it. And you should know what a normal distribution is and why lots of archaeological distributions are normal and lots of other ones are not normal, So
I like your example of absence of evidence and evidence of absence. And I'm going to quote here from the book. For example, someone might conduct an archaeological survey and find no sites of the Archaic period. It could be daring and probably imprudent to conclude from this that there were no Archaic sites in the region surveyed. And coming from the Maritimes, where there was a period of time that was called the Great Hiatus because there was an absence of Archaic sites, that's a good line note for students to pick up on early on.
Maybe that came out of my vague recollections of Sue Blair's thesis or something.
I was going to say, I did wonder if that was a conversation with Sue. So,
yeah, it wasn't a conscious reference to that, but maybe it was a subconscious one.
Yeah. So before we go, something the listener might not know or might not find on your faculty page is that you're a numismatist, and in particular, you've been studying numismatics, so historical coins and coin collections from Euro-Canadian contexts. Can you tell us a bit about this work and what we can learn from these coins and coin collections?
A little bit. We're archaeologists. If you happen to be working in an aspect of archaeology where coins are found, so for example, if you're a classical archaeologist or a medieval one, or doing archaeology in China, or doing historical archaeology in anywhere, North America or elsewhere, you will find coins quite likely, and they can be really important sources of information for archaeologists. So it's not just of interest to numismatists. It's they can provide good dating evidence, for example. In some respects, way better dating evidence than radiocarbon, because at least if you're lucky, you get coins that are dated not necessarily to a particular year, because some of them aren't, but usually they at least have very small date ranges, and you still have to take into account their time lag between when the coin was made and when it got buried in the ground. That could be, in some cases, quite a long time, but that's true of charcoal and stuff also. So they provide really good dating evidence, but they also provide really direct evidence for economy. So a lot of our inferences about economy, we have to use really indirect methods, whereas coins can provide really direct evidence because we know they were used to pay for stuff. So it tells us about trade. So one of the more obvious examples of that is that archaeologists find Roman coins in India. And and you never find Indian coins in Italy. And what that shows is there was a trade imbalance between the Roman Empire and the various kingdoms in India, because the Romans were buying spices and stuff like that, and they were paying for it with silver and gold coins, whereas the Indians weren't buying anything from Rome. They were just taking their silver and gold. They weren't interested in, olives or whatever. I don't know what the problem was, but it seemed to be very one-way trade. There was a lot because the Roman Empire really liked spices and that kind of thing. So we have direct evidence for that with these coins. But my personal interest in numismatics, at least in the last 15 years or so, has been of a different sort. It's actually not very archaeological. It's more historical and biographical and sociological, I guess. I've been investigating early Canadian numismatists. So mostly in the 19th century, some early 20th century ones, and basically figuring out who they were, doing biographies, writing biographies of them. And I actually have a book, should be coming out probably in a year or so, about about 80 or 90 of these early Canadian numismatists. And if I find the time to do it, I was thinking of doing a follow-up book that was more focused on the sort of social implications of these things. Because, among the things you'll notice is that this kind of collecting habit or hobby that a lot of these folks had, probably even more so in the 19th century than today, is that it was it had a real kind of social role in that it partly had to do with imperialism, because most of these folks were, very pro-British Empire. It also had to do with class, because people saw coin collecting as a way to be perceived as a member of at least the upper middle class, if not the upper class. And what else? It also had kind of strange, not necessarily, no, strange isn't the right word, very specific kind of racial, ethnic connections, in that at least the coin collectors we know about are almost all white men of English, Irish, or Scottish or French ancestry. And I found it really, I try hard, but I have found very few women. And I've only been able to find one early coin collector of African descent. And I haven't found any of Chinese descent, even though I'm sure there must have been some. And the reason for that is there were social barriers. So, one of the ways you find out about these guys is a lot of them, they joined various kinds of societies and associations. Some of them numismatic ones, and some of them antiquarian ones of various kinds. So a lot of them also were amateur archaeologists. So they collected coins, but they also collected arrowheads and that kind of stuff. Some of them also collected geological specimens and birds' eggs and God knows what. So there's this kind of collecting ethos back then, where it was a way of showing that you're like a sophisticated, cultured person, was to collect all this junk. And but trying to track down the ones who were not members of the predominant, most powerful social groups is tricky, because people like Black or Chinese numismatists or antiquarians would have been excluded from those groups, right? So the one Black one I was able to find, by the way, he was actually a member of some of those groups, but probably was able to do it because he corresponded by mail. Huh. And none of the other members ever met him.
Oh, really? Okay, wow.
So I would strongly suspect that if they ever met him, they would say, "Oh, we don't want you in our club," But I think he only corresponded with them by mail.
Wow. Huh. So what kind are they collecting coins? Just like British imperial coins in North America? Or are they kind of collecting coins?
It's a pretty diverse group, actually. Some of them collected mostly English coins. One very famous guy collected coins of English-speaking countries, so mostly the British Empire plus the United States. Some of them, especially the French ones, often collected coins of the French regime in Canada, although lots of the English and Scottish ones collected those also. Many of them collected early Canadian tokens. Like these were like trade tokens and stuff, so they weren't technically coins, but they're used as coins. But a lot of them also collected Greek or Roman coins, or both. Roman coins were very popular. Greek coins almost as popular, and then some of them also collected medieval European coins. So it was a pretty diverse group. In fact, I would say Greek, Roman, and medieval coins were probably collected more than Canadian coins were in the early stages. And Canadian coins became more popular over time. Partly as it became more stuff to collect, because initially there wasn't that much. There was coins of the French regime, early Canadian tokens, and Canada didn't have any coins of its own, real coins of its own until 1858. In the case of Ontario and Quebec, from 1858 on, the province of Canada coins. The maritime provinces, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland had their own coinages.
Oh, really?
But from roughly around the same time. A little bit, like New Brunswick had them a little bit earlier. I think 1830 something, they started to have their own coins. So initially there weren't that many coins to collect if you wanted to collect Canadian stuff, but a lot of a lot of them collected American coins too, because there's a lot more to collect from the United States since the U.S. started making coins in the 1780s, and
Gabe,
the
I
U.S.
think
Mint opened in the 1790s.
An 1830s New Brunswick coin could be our next New Brunswick Archaeology podcast sticker.
There we go.
There you go.
With our faces on
There you
it.
go.
We'll just subtly.
Yeah, they had some very nice coins in New Brunswick.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Ted. We really appreciate you joining us to discuss this.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. It was nice to see you.
My pleasure. It's been fun.
Yeah.
Well, Ken, I think it's time for hit pieces.
I think it is time for hit pieces.
And what's the topic of our hit piece this fortnight?
So this fortnight, we're actually highlighting a response to a hit piece that we talked about a couple of fortnights ago. Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
It was, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So recently we discussed...
Ken, what is time? It's also a question that Dillahay and Serval are arguing about.
Exactly. And so, so Gabe let it be known here that the Todd Serval article that we read from a couple of weeks ago that calls into question the dates and context of the Monteverde or MV2 archaeological site, famous in North America or in the Americas as one of the earliest Pleistocene occupations, and also kind of in many ways the site that founded the argument for a Pacific coastal route human migration into the Americas. So Dillahay has worked at the site. Tom Dillahay has worked at the site since the 1970s, was the original excavator, has done a lot of work on kind of defending the findings at that site, which is consistently dated to between about 14,000 and 14,500 years ago. And so Dillahay, I guess, I hadn't realized this, but you had mentioned he's sort of famously doesn't do interviews. Is that correct?
Oh, it wasn't me. I didn't realize that.
Oh, okay. All right. So I thought I had heard from somebody that he's not a guy who tends to do media about stuff, but maybe maybe I completely made that up in my head.
I mean, he sort of seems like I can imagine him saying that.
Yeah. I can't remember where I came across that. Maybe that's totally in my mind.
That's interesting. And Ken, the dispute, but is sort of coming down to, or a big part of the dispute is whether or not the site is underlain by a early Holocene
tephra, like a volcanic ash, right?
Yeah.
Which for the listener is about as diagnostic as you can get for chronology, right? A tephra is only created during a volcanic eruption, and these are not long-term events, right? These create a stratigraph, the crystals on them can be measured and can be dated, and in some cases, the volcanoes, the dates of the eruption are known, and these tephra can spread over very large areas. But obviously, if it is deposited underneath this archaeological site and it dates to the Holocene, I think it was around 8,000 years ago or 8,500 years ago is what Serval and them were talking about.
My recollection from the Serval article is that they think that the site is actually like 8,000 something years old, but is underlain by this tuff. They think.
Yeah, and maybe it's the tephra was around 11,000 years old.
That's right.
Like that. In any case, so Dillahay recently, so this came out April 3rd, so it was very shortly after the article came out, did an interview with David Pompeani, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. He's at David Pompeani, Pompeani, on YouTube. He is a geologist who has a YouTube channel and does a number of interviews with the intersections between geology and archaeology. The video is titled Monteverde and the Pre-Clovis Debate. Tom Dillehay responds to Serval et al. 2026. And so the interview begins with Dillehay basically just arguing that kind of comes out guns a-blazing and argues that Serval and colleagues in some ways misled readers, that they weren't actually observing the context and the stratigraphy from the actual archaeological site that Dillehay excavated, that they were observing cut banks and not working in the, they're in the Chichuape river basin, which now that we have a pronunciation after watching this video, it's nice to know that. And Dillehay says that the challenge with the Serval et al. Article is that Serval is, quote, a notorious Clovis first guy, and he believes that he sort of had these sort of ulterior motives he had a preconceived notion of what he wanted to find and went out and sought to find stuff that supported that, and so he counters Serval et al.'s article by saying that that there is a stratigraphic column at MV2 that doesn't contain any tephra and therefore can't be underlain by it. That there are these things like these chewed up cuds of organic material that are likely medicinal plants that date to around 14,000 years ago. There's a chunk of mastodon meat inside a domestic structure that is obviously Pleistocene in age if it's a mastodon. And
also clearly expired.
Clearly expired, yeah, or well preserved.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah,
mastodon jerky.
Yeah.
There's a timber structure with these tied stakes and human footprints and wood artifacts that all date to around 14,500 years ago. And there's some technological arguments to do with the projectile points. And so I think the debate will go on this one. It'll be interesting to see if there starts to be some kind of consensus more broadly. I will admit. It's probably going to be a fairly exciting SAA meeting this coming weekend.
I suspect so.
Because I suspect this is probably going to be on the tip of many people's tongues.
I think that's probably true. In fact, I'm quite looking forward to going to the Paleo Americas in the fall, where I think the mammoth fur is going to fly probably.
So
we should try to host a live debate at the Paleos.
That would be fun. I mean, in some ways, we should see if we could try to get in a couple people to talk about this. What is kind of a fascinating pre-Clovis versus Clovis debate. That Monteverde becoming a target in this is interesting, just because, as we talked about, was sort of always considered to be irrefutably Pleistocene and very early, and the blue chip panel or whatever it was,
blue ribbon, I believe.
Blue ribbon panel.
This does feel a bit like when Mike Tyson came out of retirement. There's like a certain element of
Yeah, they're still chewing on that ear. So apart from this YouTube video, and we will link it in the show notes, Gabe, we're going to do a self-hit piece here. When this episode airs, we'll be on the cusp of the Canadian Archaeological Association annual meeting from May 6th to 10th in Canmore, Alberta. And so what is taking you to the CAAs other than the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast Live?
Well, I mean, that's the primary reason I'm going, of course.
Exactly.
I'm also part of a special theory discussion where Matt Betts and I are going to be discussing the return of culture history as a paradigm. So we're excited for that.
Culture history strikes back.
Culture history strikes back. And then I'm on a paper with you and Trevor Dow about public archaeology in New Brunswick, in which actually part of our discussion is about this podcast and how it's a useful tool for public archaeology. And do you have in front of you, Ken, what session that's in?
Yeah, so the theory showcase is Thursday afternoon for those of you who are thinking about it. And actually, it's kind of conveniently placed. Sorry, I've got too many windows open here.
I have a few windows open. I have none of this information in front of me.
So the theory showcase is on Thursday afternoon, and then we are going to be presenting our paper in a session called Supplementing, Transcending, and Subverting Conventional Archaeological Regulation. And it's a series of papers basically talking about different ways that archaeologists have approached engaging with the public and kind of pushing up against prescriptive or vague regulations and guidelines in I'm guessing there going to be quite a few CRM papers
I think so.
in the session, but also sort of how people are creatively getting out to share the message about archaeology.
And Ken, what are you? You're also presenting something else. You're doing, I believe, one of the rapid fire sessions.
I'm doing too much, Gabe.
Yes.
So I am in the CCRA CRM Archaeology Showcase. Actually, Matt Monroe is going to present the paper, thankfully.
Terrific.
But Matt Monroe and Lindsay Amundsen-Meyer and I are going to be presenting a similar paper that we gave at the CCRA conference last spring, but we're updating it with sort of the preliminary results of the ongoing second round of surveys and some of the discussion groups that we've been doing over the last little while. And so that's in the CCRA showcase on Thursday morning. I'll be tuning into the theory showcase after that. So it's an all showcase
Thursday afternoon.
And then it's a New Brunswick Archaeology podcast showcase in the evening that evening.
Yes.
On Friday, I'm going to be taking part, presenting a paper on the Lower Willowstone Erosion Project in a session called The Long and Winding Road of Slow Archaeology. So talking about the work that Ramona Nicholas and I are co-directing out in New Brunswick, sort of the impetus behind the survey work, the collaboration that's going on with Wolastoqey Nation, and sort of the goals of the project, and how this sort of reflects this idea of slow archaeology, which is kind of this idea advanced by, among others, Jay Cunningham, and kind of viewing the slow science movement to sort of step back from, kind of rapidly doing all this work to kind of think about our work and digest and go a little bit slower, and what can the results of that be? And in many ways, it's basically a lot of collaborative archaeologies coming out of that. Friday evening, I have been voluntold for the lightning round with hosted by Kevin McGew, my colleague here at the University of University of Lethbridge, and so that's it's a good excuse to go to the Canmore Brewing Company.
Yes,
and then on Saturday we have
Ken, you're allowed to go to bars even if you're not doing things.
Yeah, I know.
They let almost anybody in once you have the right age.
I'll be well hydrated, but be working while I'm doing that.
Yes.
And then yeah, and I guess. Am I presenting the paper on Saturday?
I sure hope so.
Okay. Well, so then I'm presenting our paper with Trevor and you on Saturday, and then actually in the evening I'll be attending the banquet because my PhD supervisor and friend of the show and guest of season 4, Dr. Gary Copeland. I have to think, Gabe, actually his appearance on the New Brunswick Archaeology podcast may have
pushed him over the top. Yes,
may have sealed the Smith-Winterberg nomination.
Because he sort of got it as a what's in the Hall of Fame. That's like the veterans vote. It's like you even after you've fallen off the ballot, they finally elect you.
Yeah, and so that's 2 for 2, Gabe, that our guests that we've had on the podcast that have been nominated for Smith-Winterbergs have won. So.
Mine hasn't come through yet. We're 2 for 3.
many years ahead of us, Gabe.
Yes.
So
that is great.
But yeah, so it'll be a busy CAA, but it'll be fun. So looking forward to seeing lots of folks. It sounds like it's going to be very well attended. There's lots of people that I think pretty good group of people coming from out east, and we'll actually have an opportunity to speak with friend and colleague Christian Theriault, who's the provincial archaeologist in PEI, to kind of set the stage for CAA's 2027 that'll be making their way out east.
That's right. We're going to double those up with the East Coast Music Festival, right?
I believe so. We should have our staff or our media lanyards by that time.
I should hope.
Press lanyards.
Press, indeed.
Yeah.
Well, Ken, that's pretty exciting, and I will see you in Alberta soon.
Yeah, in just a matter of a week or so. You're going to be arriving early, eh?
A little bit, yeah. I'm coming out a day early or so. In part inspired by your difficulties traveling across the country. I thought, maybe I'll give myself some wiggle room.
Yeah. So you don't end up in the airport in New Jersey for your entire conference experience.
Yes, exactly. So not that I've ever had a hard time getting to a CAA before.
Exactly. All right, listener, we will catch you in Canmore, and looking forward to seeing you 7 p.m. at the Grizzly Paw Pub in Canmore, Alberta on Thursday, May 7th.
That's right. We will see you there, listener.
The New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast is brought to you every fortnight by the Association of Professional Archaeologists of New Brunswick. Funding and support is provided by Social Sciences Humanities Research Council grant, University of New Brunswick and University of Lethbridge. Research by Gabe Reinick and Ken Holyoke. Production is handled by audio engineer Emmanuel Cal. Video production by Cody Pye. Theme music is composed by Justin Hankey. Theme music remixed by Emmanuel Gal and Hakuna Rada by Shane Dell. Find us on Instagram at _New Brunswick _archaeology, on LinkedIn and on the web at newbrunswickarchaeology.com.